to develop our nation and world. Therefore, we should be able to give contribution to generate cool generation in 2035 or 2045 as equipped by the 21st century skills as the following issues. Of course, required character quality should become the main concern of us, including teachers, lecturers, parents, experts, practitioners, stakeholders, and the like, so that they give a paradigm of how blooming now law, religiosity should be part of their brain, their mind, their action. Nationalism, independence, collaboration, integrity, those are part of the moral traits that we have to maintain in the process of teaching and learning practices. Added to this, we also equip the students with basic literacies, use of language, as mentioned earlier, to deal with four maxims of quality, quantity, manner, and relevance. Literacy in numeric, science, digital technology, literacy in information and communication practices, finance literacy, culture, and citizenship literacy should be driven, should be presented explicitly or implicitly at any subjects. Competence or capabilities, as mentioned earlier, critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, cultural understanding, care for self, others, and care for planet, curiosity. Those, of course, are part of the moral traits that we should go hand in hand to facilitate, to drive on our students to hold the three dimensions: character, quality, basic literacies, and competence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be aware that nowadays we have been in the revolution of education 4.0, in line with industrial revolution 4.0. There is shift of paradigm on the part of teachers, lecturers, students, including us. This relies on the theory, this relies on the fact that each era, each revolution has its own characteristics. Again, it has its own characteristics. Take, for example, in the first revolution of education 1.0, which gave him an emphasis on lecturer-centered with the implementations of pedagogy, assuming that students are not the agents of change. They are the object of change. But of course, we have to shift from the first revolutions of education to the third or even fourth revolutions of education, which is characterized by some indicators, namely eudagogy. Again, Utagoji. Equipped by smart technology, augmented virtual reality, artificial intelligence, gamification, personalized learning. This suggests that we, as educators, should shift our paradigm from pedagogy to utagogy. What is meant by utagogy? Utagogy is one of the paradigms in the education practices which give an emphasis on generating self-determined learning so that the students will be self-determined learners to develop not only competence but capabilities with the use of double loop learning, not single loop learning, not linear learning, but of course multi-learnings as mentioned by Alvin Toffler. Learn to learn, learn to unlearn, and learn to relearn. Therefore, free goji, utagoji, pedagogy, cybergogy should be part of our paradigm in educational practices so that learners are not constrained by the teachers, but they could establish themselves to be self-determined learners, self-determined learning, collaboration across students within the same schools, across schools in this country, across countries should be facilitated to improve cooperation, collaboration, which is highly required to survive in the 21st century, in the disruption era. In line with Revolution Industry 4.0, cybergogy, everybody, should be one of the paradigm of our teaching and learning practices at any level of education. Therefore, pedagogy, andragogy, utagogy, pedagogy, and cybergogy should go hand in hand to develop our agile young generations with regard to the balance of three dimensions: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Moral values, moral education should become our concern. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the keynote speech by Professor Dr. Margana M. Hum, MA. We are now moving to the next item of today's agenda, that is plenary session 1. Two outstanding speakers in their fields will be sharing their ideas with us this morning, and they are Hilmar Farid, PhD, from the Directorate General of Culture of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of the Republic of Indonesia. The second speaker is Associate Professor Alex Ruthman, PhD. This session is chaired by Rutna Hidayah, PhD. Dear moderator, would you please take the floor?
Thank you, Ibu Nuni Sugesti, for offering the floors.
Honorable all invited speakers, respectable all presenters and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Retna Hidayah, very happy to be here with all of you. Even though we are entering the second year of the pandemic that forced us physically apart, but with the help of technology, we have our opportunity to virtually connected to join in the ninth International Conference on Educational Research and Innovation hosted by Institute of Research and Community Center Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta. For the next 2 hours, with pleasure, I will be with all of you in our first plenary session. This morning, we have two outstanding speakers who were excited to share knowledge and experiences with us. They are His Excellency Hilmar Farid PhD, Director General of Culture, Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology, Republic of Indonesia. The second speaker, Alex Ratman PhD, from the dual appointment of New York University, Shanghai, and Steinhardt. Bapak Alex Rutman PhD already joined with us in this room, and Bapak Hilman Farid PhD will join later after completing the state agenda to welcome Heroes Day this morning. And now it is my pleasure to briefly introduce both speakers. Our first speaker, Bapak Hilman Farid PhD. After completing his doctoral program in the field of cultural studies at the National University of Singapore, Hilman Farid returned to teaching at the Jakarta Arts Institute and the master program in literature at the University of Indonesia. His interest in history and culture has led Hilman Farid to establish the Jaringan Kerja Budaya, Cultural Work Network, and manage Media Kerja Budaya, Cultural Work Media as a printed media with researcher and cultural worker in Jakarta in 1994. He founded and led the Indonesian Institute of Social History. Currently, he is also the chairman of the non-profit organization Praxis Society since 2012 and became a board of director of the Village and Regional Empowerment Initiative. Apart from writing articles and books on culture and story, Bapak Hilmar is also an editor of the Asian Regional Exchange for the New Alternatives and the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. Since 2015, Bapak Hilman Farid has held a position as a Director General of Culture, Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, Republic of Indonesia. Our second speaker, Alex Ratman, PhD. He is an associate professor and area head of interactive media and business at New York University, Shanghai, and associate professor of music education and music technology and New York University, Steinhardt. At NYU, he leads the Music Experiences Design Laboratorium, which partner with cultural, educational, and industry organizations to research and design new technology and experiences for music making, learning, and engagement. His research interests mostly in exploring arts innovation and entrepreneurship, creative learning and teaching with digital technologies, computational and musical thinking, and digital learning strategies. Apart from writing many articles, Alex Ratman served as co-author on the book Stretch Music Project published by Oxford University Press, co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of Technology and Music Education and Lattice Companion to Music, Technology, and Education. He is also co-editor in the International Journal of Music Education, managing and co-editor of the International Journal of Education and the Arts. His interest in music and education has bring Alex Ruthman to actively consult with nonprofit, industry, and government clients across the art, education, technology, and design. Today, Alex Ruthman, PhD, will share with us what music and musical experiences can teach. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 hours for this session, and I will offer to both speakers each 45 minutes for presentation. During the presentation, all participants are welcome to write a question in the chat room, and please mention to whom the question are addressed. After all speakers delivering a talk, we have 30 minutes for discussion in this session, and I will offer selected questions to be answered by the speaker. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Bapak Alex Rahman, PhD, to deliver the presentation entitled What Music and Musical Experiences Can Teach. All right, Bapak Alex, 45 minutes ahead, the room is yours.
Hello and welcome. It's wonderful to be able to speak with you this morning and to share a little bit about my work that I've been doing both in China at New York University Shanghai campus and in New York City at our Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. My title today is talking a bit about what music and musical experiences can teach. I'll be sharing some frameworks and ideas that guide me in my work, collaborating with young people, with teachers, with technology developers and cultural partners in designing together new experiences for musical and creative expression. Many of these tools that we develop also go beyond music. We collaborate frequently with educators and researchers in science, in math, across the arts. Many of these are interdisciplinary work using technology to expand and reach our students, not just in our classrooms, but wherever they are at home and around the world. At the core of as my lab is this notion of experience design from the philosopher John Dewey. Yes, it is music ed as in music education, but it's also broad for us. We look at the role of the teacher as a designer and facilitator of experiences. Therefore, we're very interested in learning from design process and how we can design more engaging experiences that foster learning, that engage students intrinsically and build curiosity, and particularly what we can learn from artistic experiences to inform the development of digital technologies moving forward. We are quite a big group of researchers and students and staff working from across a number of different fields, from computer science to design to engineering to visual art, education, both students in Shanghai and in New York City. And one of the key principles we start with in our education work is that everywhere there is music is an opportunity for music education and also for creative experience design. We really deliberately take a very wide view of where education can happen. And particularly recently, with the pandemic and COVID and courses needing to go online, it's even more imperative that we as educators, researchers, teacher educators prepare our students to engage their pupils, not just face-to-face in our classrooms, but everywhere else they might engage the world. I know our prior speaker is talking about educating the whole person. And our students are musicians and engaging with music and the arts and all of our subjects outside of our classes as well as inside. So we're really trying to focus in my lab on all of those spaces, whether that's learning in community, learning in schools, learning at home, learning online, and all of the hybrid spaces in between those different areas with that. And particularly during COVID, what might we as teachers and educators, how should we think about better structuring and scaffolding our students' work outside of class time, as well as inside of class time? In my lab, we focus a lot on these 4 dispositions when we are designing experiences together with students and teachers, or building technologies which might be in the web, or virtual reality immersive experiences. We're also doing projects in AI to be a support to students as they're being creative and learning. But we're really interested in how can we design experiences that focus on play, on active making, tinkering and testing hypotheses and playing around, and that draw on students' intrinsic curiosity and helps develop that curiosity. It's often easy when we're designing technology experiences to go to gaming and other existing digital metaphors. And those are fine. Those are good for that. But for us, we're not so interested in extrinsic rewards or metaphors of competition and work that often are a part of gaming mechanics. We're really interested in how can we better understand creative and artistic processes when students are composing or drawing or dancing or painting. How can we better understand that, or playing, and then use those principles that engage kids and professionals in the arts to better design digital tools for learning, whether that's learning to code or to design, or learning music, or learning anything really with that. So a little bit about where we start in lab, some of our early experience, which I'll share. We start, a lot of our early projects have focused on novice learners and novice beginners of all ages. And so we've initially tried to focus on the design space between the preschool xylophone and Apple's GarageBand with that. For something like Apple's GarageBand, we try to think, is there something we could create that would be simpler, that might promote students to share and be social and create ideas and to learn from each other, but maybe a little simpler, and something that was available. As I mentioned, our software all exists on a website, so that students on their phones or tablets at school or at home can access this. If students have GarageBand on a computer at school, they might not have access to that outside. And so we're really interested in using pervasive technology and designing for that, so that students really have access to the content we want to teach as teachers, the repertoire, and what we have outside of the classroom, not just when they might have access to special technology. On the other side, we're also really interested in children's play patterns and how can we add creative sound and movement in that space, particularly with virtual reality and spaces like that. And I'll give you examples of some of the projects we're working on as we're trying to learn and focus on designing musical experiences that teach, whether that's digital or face-to-face. And so for the past 5 years, I've been spending more time at our campus in China, and in particular teaching a course every summer and now in the school year called Creative Learning Design. And I've really been trying to immerse myself in the philosophies in China as well, to kind of better understand and guide how might we maybe learn from what's happening there to guide our experiences as well. So I want to start a little bit with a little Chinese philosophy, that of yin and yang. And in Chinese philosophy, I teach a course called Creative Learning in China together with our chancellor, who's an educational philosopher, both from Western and Chinese traditions. And the way that he describes kind of an approach to education influenced by these Confucian teachings, is that the ideal education is one that is constantly in flux and in tension, balancing the yin and the yang, and it's all about achieving a sense of he, or harmony, of exploring and existing and living and negotiating complementary differences. That the goal of education is to have a respect for the constant shifting perspectives, that the reality of the adult world that we're preparing our students for is this not just being in harmony, but an active disposition of harmonizing with the world, of understanding other perspectives, understanding and wanting to dwell and spend time in that harmonizing process, to not look for the single quick answer or the absolute truth and just accept that. But that's part of being an adult. And so therefore in schools, how can we think about these principles applied to our philosophies of teaching and education? And then we're trying to bring these philosophies into our design work. So starting from this more Chinese philosophical position, I'd like to introduce you to an educational philosopher from Europe who is getting at similar ideas, but from a different, more Western philosophical perspective. And his name is Geert Biesta. And his belief is that the role of education is the role of teachers and schools is to arouse the desire in our students for wanting to exist in the world in a grown-up way. And for him, he refers to education as living in the middle ground, where our students should exist in the world as a subject or active participant in, but not at the center, to not completely center what they need and their needs at the center of everything, but to exist there in tension with the world and to be in dialogue. The goal of the students is to want to be in dialogue and be in tension with the world, to be curious and to stay engaged with contexts and material that are challenging. And that really learning happens in these spaces. When I first started applying design methodologies to the work we do in my lab, we were borrowing methodologies from Stanford, from product design and things like that, where the primary goal is to remove barriers and to remove friction and to develop efficiency. And that can be great when our goal is to accomplish something easier or with that. But that lies in contrast often with what a good environment is and what a good experience is for learning. Because if we think back to strong learning experiences each of us may have had, many of them have required us to work through an understanding we didn't have that was incomplete, or for us to think through, to confront a challenge and to work through that. So resistance and friction are important aspects of an environment for learning as we think through that. So from this point of view, from Professor Biesta, the role of the teacher then in these experiences, particularly in this kind of, he's reacting to a kind of turn in education that has become more student-centered. But what is the role of a teacher in an open, constructivist, student-centered environment? And for him, that is to interrupt the learning, to disrupt the natural ways of thinking, to create some friction and resistance, to suspend time, to inquire in and to look more deeply at a problem, but also to do that in a caring, safe way, to provide sustenance and engaging environments and experience design to, again, go back to keeping students from running away from a challenge to the safe answer, or running away from that, but to actually to want to live and dwell and work deeply with that challenge. And these are all principles that we're trying to learn from in the design of our technology tools and our digital environments that I will share a little bit later. I'd like to go further, that Professor Biesta also believes that the arts, visual art, music, dance, are uniquely positioned as a unique domain area of creative practice to teach these dispositions, to want to, again, desire to exist in the world in a grown-up way and to engage with challenge and to work through that. So for him, he says that art interrupts. When we encounter a piece of art, it poses questions. It makes us look and look again at the world and at ourselves. And I think this is something that that certainly resonates with my background as a musician and an educator. Whenever I, as a musician, encounter a new piece of music, I'm not able to play it. But part of my musical training is to work through and practice and spend time to get that to the point. And over time, through the help of my teachers and through connecting to my self-motivations, I want to spend more time to improve that. You can look at that similarly in visual art, when we might start with a creative idea and we're then presented with a blank canvas to present it and to paint on. And that act of painting, immediately we make a mark on the canvas, and then we step back and look at it, and then we make another mark, and we work back and forth between the medium. And these are ways of being that are part of creative and artistic process, because they're part of making and remaking and reflecting with that. And so the arts experience as a whole has an opportunity to teach the child to work through these challenges and to think through their beliefs and to think through their creative expression. He also mentions that art slows down experience. It gives form to the notion of what it may mean to try and to be at home in the world. And so when he's saying being at home in the world, it's like this is part of what professional artists do, to find their way, to test out these ways of thinking, whether that's thinking as a scientist or thinking as a musician or as a visual artist or as an engineer or as a business person. These experiences in our classrooms are opportunities to try on these dispositions, to think through these experiences. And art itself provides us a sustenance for wanting to stay in this middle ground, to stay there, that there's some value that's being given back to us as creators through that process that's perhaps more intrinsic as we think through to kind of learn from that. So I wanted to share these kinds of philosophical principles, one set of harmonizing and from yin and yang from Eastern philosophy, but now also seeing from Western philosophy kind of coming together with this desire that the role of education is to design and intervene in experiences for our students where they want to continue to dwell with challenge, with complexity, to find their way, and in a safe environment to try on different visions of the world as they're working through our content. And these have been really influential philosophies to me in the work that we're doing in our lab as we move forward. Again, going back to experience design, a lot of the work that I do is working with students who, particularly in Shanghai, who are not teachers, but are designers or artists and who are interested in working in an education context. So we start with a framework of experience design, where we design an attraction that somehow is connected to the motivations of our audience, our students, whoever we're working with. Then we design this core engagement, the core experience that has some kind of a conclusion, some kind of a satisfying pause point or an end point, so that we can step back and reflect on the experience before moving in. And as the previous speaker was saying, that with this move towards multiple learnings and technologies and that, we really have to start thinking about how do we sequence different approaches to experience design, particularly as we extend the physical and temporal bounds of our classrooms through technology, online, outside using digital technologies. How do we structure our content and our pedagogy so that students can follow multiple pathways, can make decisions along the way, can be supported in that by their peers, by us, and by other people that they're working with, their families in that. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking through what are meaningful ways of sequencing these approaches to experience design. And the other key component that we're really trying to focus on when we're designing digital experiences is what are the learning horizons for the experiences that we are designing. Are we designing an experience that a student is going to spend 20 minutes working on? Or is this a 2-week project? Or is it a year-long project? And having a sense of our learning horizon, our end goals, will help us determine how we structure the nature of the content we teach and the processes for getting our students there as we move forward with that. I'm seeing there's a question in here, and I'm happy to pause at this point before I move on and answer that. The question is, based on my experience, what kinds of attractions are effective to engagement for students in class? And I would say that that depends on who the students are. And this is a big part of what we do when we're beginning our design work, is we spend time getting to know our students. It's about the relationships that we as educators or designers have built with our students, so that we know their motivations, we know where that is. And so it really depends on the content that we're teaching. But when we're teaching this class, we spend the first third of the semester, the course is creative learning design, getting to know our partners, or getting to know the students we're collaborating with. What motivates them? What is the curriculum? What do they need to learn? What does the curriculum need them to learn? What are they interested in learning? And we look at those overlaps and then try to connect to that. So sometimes it's the end goal that motivates them, that attracts them in. Sometimes it's the use of the technology, or the fact that they can share what they're doing with that. And some of this will become a bit more concrete. I'll be sure to come back to that when I show some of the creative apps that we've been working on. So I'll come back to that from there. So at the end of this, really, for us in the lab and thinking as educators, it's really about balancing the freedoms and the frictions that we and our curriculum and our pedagogy affords. So again, if we're trying to create an environment where our students want to encounter these frictions, balanced with freedom in a way that sustains them and keeps them in that productive tension, we have to think about that balance. And for us, that comes down to this. We always start with, who are our audiences? What freedoms and frictions do they need? What supports are needed for our students to dwell with and work through these frictions and resistance? And so this is the big challenge when we're designing this work. Not making it so smooth and easy, intuitive, that they're just going through with flow. Not that those flow experiences aren't important, but it's not where they're going to actively encounter learning opportunities if all the barriers are removed. And certainly we don't want there to be barriers that are too high to the experience where they then step back and can no longer work. But we have to constantly balance this with a safe environment, welcoming environment, and strong relationships. So sometimes that means, what might we remove from an experience to engage and sustain that learning? We might need to lower a barrier. We might need to do some pre-work as we think through that. And all of these have been experiments in what we can learn from musical and artistic expression. Just like Professor Biesta talks about these unique qualities of the artistic creation process as educative for this kind of experience, what can we learn from that to then structure learning in other areas, or learning online, or learning that is interdisciplinary? And a lot of the projects I've been working on have been at those interdisciplinary intersections between music and coding, or math and music and visual art. And the last insight that we're working with in the lab is, how can we use digital technologies to capture and reflect students' learning processes? We're very good in the arts about having students present the final product and to critique that, and to look at the role of that and to adjudicate that. But most of the, I think, to me, the key insights for learning that help me as an instructor and educator design better experiences and better provide the feedback my students need, I need to have a better sense of my students' creative process. If I am teaching a choir, I am the director and I'm in rehearsal, and I can observe the students' process, and so I can deal with that face to face. If I'm leading a music making lesson or a listening lesson, my students are in front of me and I can ask questions and look at that. But as we move more and more of some of the content engagement to digital, and to digital experiences that our students are having outside of our classroom, we lose that direct observation and insight into our students' learning process and creative thinking process. this is a situation where the technology, because it's great when we can put on headphones and it's a quiet classroom and our students can work independently, but we as educators lose vision into how our students are thinking and working with that. So I'm interested as a designer of technology about how can we capture students' learning and creative processes when they're working with digital technology, to visualize that back not only to us as educators so that we see how students went from A to Z and the points in between, but how can we visualize this creative learning process back to the students themselves so that when they're learning outside of class without us, that they might be able to have access to that creative learning process to scaffold and advance their own self-directed learning and work with that. So these are the things that we're working on in my lab in general and thinking through that. So at this point, I'd like to just give you a highlight of some of the major projects of my lab and walk you through a few of them so you can get a sense of some of these principles, how we're operationalizing them. So we have 4 major bins of projects. My lab was launched in 2013 in New York, and a lot of them are creative musical play and learning, web apps, which I'll be talking, experiences at the intersection of computer coding, arts, and play. In particular, I've been working on a project in Norway with preschools, where we've been working with preschool teachers to design immersive play environments at the preschools where kids are actively involved in story creation and creative expression with digital technologies, but without screens. So we've been working on piloting kind of creative playrooms where students go in and start using their voice and words to change the environment. So we're actually using artificial intelligence technology to listen to the words kids say. So we will, in these environments, set up maybe 2 or 3 key words and give the students a prompt to start telling stories around those words. And when they say that word, the lights change and music plays and the students are able to then experience this world. And then as they discover words, then they start to play around with the storytelling and music. But then it's not just about the environment where a student where they only can encounter the words that are pre-programmed. We've trained the preschool teachers to then work with the students to capture their drawings, to capture their words, to capture their songs, and then create similar settings for this play space based on words the students are coming up with. So it's also a project to develop literacy with that, but it's in this context of students go into this play world, tell stories, create, and then the world shifts based on what they say. Again, a way to kind of lower the barrier. They're not coding. They're not in front of a screen individually. It's social. It's around play. It's around creative expression. But they're also gaining fluency in the technologies that are part of their grown-up life, where they're calling Alexa or Siri on their phone and working with that. But rather than doing it in a way that there's a lot of people that are actually feel negatively about some of these technologies, particularly for young kids, because it's teaching them to be bossy to their technology, to direct the technology to do something for them. And this is a way to kind of shift that, to develop maybe a more ethical character trait of, we're going to use this for collaboration and creative expression together. And we have to learn how to work together if we're going to use these words in this way. So it's how can we create these experiences that teach students to not just be in control of technology, but to have to work together collaboratively in good ways together, and to model those kind of good behaviors and dispositions as we work through. So to give you an idea of where we started with, and I see the question in there around virtual duets, we have a slightly different approach to virtual duets. Again, in my space, a lot of the technologies that already exist for music making and learning are very complex. I would gather that many of you, since this is a broad audience, look at this and can't make sense of these visualizations here. They're very complex. And that can be hard for a novice and a beginner. Equally hard and for a beginner is a blank slate. So when we also open up our music creation software or our artistic creation software, if it's Photoshop, it often starts with a metaphor of a blank page or a void. And that is equally hard for a beginner to work with. So in my lab, we spend a lot of time trying to focus on creating experiences where students work directly with music and things present, and then work down to the ability, work up to more complexity, and work down to starting more from scratch. I'm going to stop sharing my screen briefly and reshare so I can share audio with you, because I don't think I clicked the right buttons from my Zoom. So I will set this up again and reshare with you. Actually, I'll do one more time, almost have it there. There we go, we'll do share this one here. This is a bit clearer. So one of our first experience was creating an online virtual duet. And this was an experience we created together with a musician with the Chamber Music Society of Detroit. And the idea was, could we create a digital experience so that students could experience a duet with a professional musician in a way? Because what he would normally do is he would go and give a concert for students, and then would slide down to the left hand of the piano and perform on the black keys, and then invite a child to sit next to him to improvise on the right hand, to talk about musical collaboration, partnership, how the parts interact with each other. But in those concerts, only 2 or 3 students would have that experience. So we thought, well, could we use technology to open this up? And so what we did was we created a video of him performing, but we took the computer keyboard, or if you load this on your phone, there's a little keyboard that shows up, and we took the bottom row of the computer keyboard, and if you put your finger on the bottom row and drag to the right, it plays the notes. And so I'm going to turn down my volume a little because it's a little loud in my ear. But what you can do is hit the video. And then just with a row of a keyboard or moving left and right on your phone, you can play the duet, and it shows you the notes that are there. And because this was, this might seem like a pretty kind of easy technology, but it really opens up creative processes for children that often in traditional music education we might not get to later, because we might often start with music theory, where we have to learn a lot of things before we can actually get to the creating and the improvising. This opens up the creative process of improvisation and exploration and play for anybody who can move their finger across their keyboard or across the screen. And one thing that we noticed when we launched this website, because it's online, we can look at the learning analytics from how people use this. And what we discovered is that the students who would load this website were spending 30 and 40 minutes with this video on loop, improvising, which is a really, really long amount of time for a child to stay engaged with something like this, let alone to be engaged in improvisation and composing with that. There was some magic kind of alignment between the video. The video itself is only 40 seconds, but they would loop it for 30 and 40 minutes and then play around with different keys and work with that. So we, from a design point of view and an experience education point of view, we knew we had come onto something that there was something sticky here. There was a balance of freedom in order that we made it, the gesture and the way of improvising, very free and very open, but there was enough resistance and friction that sustained them in continuing to play. And this was without any written instructions other than, press the bottom row of the keyboard and drag. There was something here between the nature of the music and the scaffolding and there that really moved it forward. And so from there we moved and built another tool called the Aquateon, or the QWERTY accordion, which maps the computer keyboard so that it turns it into a creative improvisation platform that's more than just one thing. And it allows you to synchronize a video to that. So the songs that we would be teaching in class, we could put a video in, and then the students could improvise with it, or they could find the chords that were with it and play along with it, or do other kinds of things with that. So this is a lot of what we're trying to work with. How can we use new media, immersive experiences, sometimes virtual reality, to kind of, but in a very easy way. So when we're talking about virtual reality and immersion, because we're used to designing these with teachers and students who often don't have complex, expensive technologies. They can't afford a VR headset. How can we get maybe 80% of the way to an immersive experience like performing with this piano player, just using the web browser, just wearing headphones, just projecting it in the classroom on a screen and having the students come up and play. Yes, there's a lot of potential for virtual reality and things like this, but it's still going to be many years before this really becomes inexpensive and accessible to many students with that. So we're trying to create these lower fidelity, easier access experiments just with musicians and kind of creation in the browser to get there to take advantage of it now. And that's the benefit of our collaborative participatory design process, because traditionally, you know, if the companies would develop this and then push out, oh, you have to have a $300 VR headset. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work for a lot of the students that I taught. And so we needed to find other ways to make our musical content and creative processes that we're teaching more engaging and accessible, so that the artistic experience could teach our students to want to spend more time and to dwell in this kind of creative tension, and to learn how to teach themselves. That was also a theme that was in the prior speaker's talk, that more and more people now are learning online and are teaching themselves, but not all of our students have the skills to really be their best teacher. And I think that's something that we have to think about as a field as well. How can we design experiences so that they're better able to monitor, reflect on their learning, and help teach, particularly when they're following their own interests on their own time. So this was kind of this first experiment. We also brought this over to a series of musical playgrounds that we created in partnership. This was a set of creative web experiences for kids to compose and interact with Western classical music that we did in partnership with the New York Philharmonic. The New York Philharmonic has a wide range of young people's concerts, and they wanted us to build kind of a digital playground so that students could play and get to know the music they were going to see in the concert before they went to the concert, so that they would have a better experience at the concert. They would be more familiar with the music. And then after the concert, once they had been excited by seeing the musicians, they would be able to come back to that and continue to create. It's great to be able to send our students to concerts and interact with live musicians and to work with that, but how can we provide materials for them to learn and kind of continue that experience in our classrooms and also at home? So just to give you an example of this and how we balance that, this was a playground around Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. And when we were designing this with the New York Philharmonic education staff, we went back and forth about what do we need to have the students know beforehand. Did we need to teach them about the Italian names for notes and allegro and things like that? Or is it really about come in and do that? And so again, we're trying to balance freedom and friction. So we created this landscape where you're just given the prompt, drag me to explore the music. And so I'll go ahead and click on this and drag it around. And as you drag it, you'll see and hear music being created. And when I let up, it actually creates a little recording of what I did in the bottom left, and it shows you a visualization of the pathway that I drew as I explored this space. If I click that again, it'll replay what I did. And for us, when we're designing these experiences, the metrics that we've moved towards, influenced by Biesta, influenced by the Chinese philosophical principles of harmonizing and working in that, is for us a good interface and introductory attraction into this experience is one where the students ask questions. If we make it too simple, where they're just going along and there's nothing for them to be curious about or to ask a question about, we haven't provided enough structure, or we've made it too easy. So for us, when we're designing, our first metric is, are our students asking questions of the experience? and of the interface. And because of that, you know, the student might be curious about, well, what's actually happening here as I move my mouse up and down? And so they can go and click on the question mark. And if you click on the question mark, it then reveals that as you're drawing, you're actually moving around a grid of musical possibilities with it. So if I click up here in the upper right, the notes are very dense and close together. And as you see, it's going to be loud, fortissimo. And as I go down, it then gets softer. If I start over here, they're sparse. The notes are farther apart. And when I'm in the upper three, I'm in the high register. And when I drop below, it goes into the lower register. So we're having students explore dimensions of music to kind of explore. And then once they kind of are familiar with that, if you notice here, this is where it starts, just very open drag. Then they can click the question mark and they get a guideline. They're not given the answer. They're not given directions for how to interact with the tool. But then this ellipses appear. And then you can get to what's going on, the labels, what we want to teach. So for us, this was a deliberate, different way of designing an interface, a digital interface for learning and for expression. Because if you think about a new website that you might go to, maybe it's for tracking your expenses or whatever, the best practice for these experiences is you land on the website the first time, and then it immediately walks you through a tutorial. Here's how you do this, here's how you do this, here's where you find this. And that makes sense for us as adults because we're wanting to learn this as efficiently and as quickly as possible. We want to be able to, we're going to that website because we want to accomplish a task and we don't want to waste time doing that. But that's not necessarily, to me, the disposition that I want to provide the students in my classroom. Yes, there's sometimes I want to teach them something efficient, but there are other times when I want them to dwell and to ask questions and to think through. So we deliberately slow down, as Biesta was saying, the answer to how to do something and instead make it more around curiosity and play and exploration where they have to kind of figure it out and ask questions. But we don't make it so that they're only 2 clicks away from getting to that as they share. And so with any of these platforms that we do, they're simple websites. You can just go to the website. And then when students create with it, they can click this button, add a little description, you know, here's my composition, please listen, for example. And then they're given a unique URL that then they can send to the teacher, they can send to their parent, and work with it. They don't have to sign in. We're not keeping track of in a learning management system of people, and that it's meant to be so super easy so that a teacher or a parent can give the student the website they can create, but then there's a simple way for them to take that experience, share that, come back to it. And the student and the teacher not only sees the final version or painting that they've done, but they see all of the different iterations. Each time a student puts down that and creates, the tray fills up and they can choose which ones. And so this is something where the student can then maybe reorder it in the order that they want and then send that to the teacher, or the teacher can kind of see that. So these are just some experiments from those educational principles that I talked about earlier that I think are really interesting to play with, because we're trying to bring this to the design of these digital experiences as we think through that. One other quick thing to kind of show you is our most popular app right now is an app called Groove Pizza that we developed together with jazz musician Herbie Hancock and the U.S. Department of Education for an initiative called Math, Science, and Music. And for this, we brought together teachers and students in math, in science, and music, and also visual art in our case, to develop a playful tool so that kids could play with shapes and symmetry and line and fractions in a creative way, but through creating musical grooves. So you can use it as a purely musical tool for creating rhythms and grooves, or you can use it in service to primary math and visual art curriculum. So we call this the groove pizza because we have this circular pizza-like interface that has 3 rings, an outer ring, a middle ring, and an inner ring. And each ring is a different drum sound with that. And so here it's a pizza because we can add and remove toppings. We actually can rotate them around. But if I go back and I hit play, it'll move the cursor around and generate a groove. So, and you can sequence up to 4 different. And so you can play in this kind of easy way. Again, it doesn't start blank, and it's a simplified version so that you can play. And one thing that we realized, again, if you start with a blank pizza and you start adding toppings, it takes a lot of musical understanding and patience to build a groove that sounds good. So that's why we start with grooves that are already there and then you make adjustments. But also we needed a simpler way of playing around with that. So that's where we went and played around with shape. So I can go ahead and start the pizza here. I'm going to limit it to 1 so that we just stay in this one looping over and over. And by putting a shape on, we actually can create a groove very easily with just 3 steps. So I'm going to start with a 4-sided shape, and I can put it in the outer layer, and I have a bass sound, snare, or hi-hat. And then now I'm going to drive, let's put a 5-sided shape on there. And then maybe a 3-sided shape. So very quickly, a student playing around with these shapes and lines and symmetry can kind of explore this. We can take a look at pre-existing music, such as, this is from a popular music song. A lot of popular music, a byproduct of that is that the rhythms are very symmetrical and even, such as this. But in other genres, such as funk, it might have the same elements. Here is a pop beat, here is a funk beat, but what's different is it's asymmetrical. It's a little unbalanced, and that's part of what makes that musical genre that genre. Also, we can add in the angles for this to kind of teach, creating grooves through obtuse, acute, right angles, kind of playing around just to kind of open it up. But another thing in music that is often really hard to teach is music that moves in meters that are other than just 2 or 4 or 3. So here our pizza is divided into 16, but we can adjust those number of slices down to, hey, what happens if we divide it into 9 or 5 or 7 or 14? So for instance, the groove pizza is being used right now by a number of schools in Greece, where music moves in music, instead of being grouped in patterns of 4, is often grouped in patterns of 7 and 9 and 2s and 3s. And so most traditional music creation tools are biased towards Western popular kind of music forms, where this is now a tool where they can bring the music of their culture in that moves in these differing patterns of 2s and 3s in kind of a more creative way, and kind of these patterns to kind of sync through. So I know I'm running kind of short on my 45 minutes, but I just wanted to kind of highlight those as some examples from there that we were going for, and really now kind of open it up to you for questions you might have around some of these ideas, how they might work in an Indonesian context, or any questions you have about this. I'm happy to go from there. And if it makes more sense to discuss these at the end of the next session, I'm happy to do that as well. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for Alex Redmond, PhD, for your informative and interesting talk. We can learn how to improve student curiosity and improve their engagement in learning music. And you can learn how to the teacher involved in teaching learning by interrupting, suspending, and providing sustenance to facilitate students' curiosity and engagement. Next, we should all listen to the second speaker's presentation, but with great regret, we must convey that our speaker, who was scheduled to join us in the first plenary session, Bapak Hilmal Farid, just called us and informed that he was unable to attend as he has a sudden agenda should be attend at the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to session of question and answer. I'm very happy to invite participants to provide response and question to all speakers. We already selected question written in the chat room. For the first session of question and answer, I will offer for Ibu Kun Setianing Astuti to deliver your question. Please, Ibu Kun, you can on cam. Langsung di sini dulu.
Okay, dear Alex, thank you so much for your presentation. I met difficulties when I teach about ensemble of music, yeah, because delay problem. Maybe you can give us a suggestion how to
Sure.
make teaching in ensemble music is going effectively. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sure. I assume, just to clarify, that you're asking, how do we do that when it's online? Is that you're asking about how to better do that with delay? So like if we were all ensembles and we were trying to sing together, is that what you're saying?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
With online. Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we are limited by the physics constant of the speed of light. So the further away we are, the more delay, just because of how that takes into process the sound. And to work with that, there are some tools that if we have good bandwidth and we're close together, and there are a number of experiments going on. There is a technology called Jack Trip that does allow some collaboration. But if we're performing music that is very rhythmic, for example, where people need to be in time, it's almost impossible to do that and to stay together. So a lot of teachers around the world, there have been more and more apps that have been created that still simulate an ensemble experience, but put together the performance afterwards, virtual choirs, virtual bands. There are a number of apps such as Acapella that allow a teacher to put a video of them teaching or with a soundtrack, and then students will record themselves individually singing or playing the part with that, and then it's put together as a virtual performance. And that really is what a lot of my colleagues did, certainly during the pandemic when they weren't able to meet, to have that. That said, there are some opportunities, there are some apps out there that I can share that are still getting kind of a live experience, but it's not quite the same. So unfortunately, there's no real solution to live acoustic music making together. We still don't think that, there's still, the farther and farther away we are, if you think about that as if I'm on one side of a soccer field or a football field and you're on another, and we try to play at the same time, we're going to hear the sound differently just because of acoustics. So there's no easy way around that, unfortunately. So it's really about, it's been an opportunity actually in the United States, where we have a very strong ensemble tradition, to actually shift our students to get to know the composer and to get to know more musicology, to understand what's the music theory happening in this piece, what's the context about it. Because one thing I know in the United States, we have a tendency to be very efficient at teaching how to prepare for the performance and to have a really good performance, but our students might not know about the music. They might not know about the performer. So this has really been an interesting time during the pandemic for our students to learn more about the piece of music. And I think this is a question for us as instructors as we go back to meeting face to face. What should we preserve from our explorations during COVID and teaching online that are actually worth keeping around? And that's something that I hope, at least in the United States, that the fact that many ensemble classrooms will Zoom with the composer and learn about the piece. I hope we continue to do that. I hope that our teachers will make available the scores to our students to study and to learn from and to bring back with that. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think I like to look at it as an opportunity. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. I solved the problem by using a soundtrack that
Oh,
I
great.
write down the score, and then I provide the combo like drum, bass, and piano. And I record it, and I send to students to play this, and they will play with their instrument, like maybe like flute or
Yeah.
belira or anything. Yeah, that is what I
Yeah.
do right now. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think having them play and add their voice or add their instrument on top is absolutely the way to go. With that, and it just means that everybody's kind of adding their own thing, and with that, and I think there's interesting learning that comes from that. So I think that's a good way to work in the meantime.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex Rahman, for your response. And now I would like to invite another question for participants. Please raise your hand. Any other questions? Really? No questions?
That's okay. I put a link to all of our software in the chat. So if you want to go and explore the tools or reach back out to us, we're happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ibu Ayuniza, do you have a question, Ibu Ayuniza?
Enough, maybe I would like to thank you, Ibu Retna. Maybe later I would like to contact Mr. Alex.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Ayuniza.
Thank you.
Really, no questions? For all participants, you can raise your hand. It's very difficult.
Very interesting presentation.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
To agree. Any other questions? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Bapak Hilmar Farid already sent the speech for us, and now I would like to invite Ibu Nunuk Sugesti to read the speech. Please, Ibu Nuni.
Yes, Purna, I'm ready.
Yeah, please. The time is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Retna. Ladies and gentlemen, the following I'm going to read out the first speakers for today's points to ponder. Let me start from the beginning. Well, art-based education has become a part of the general awareness of the world community and the constitutional mandate of the Republic of Indonesia. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, art education is part of the realization of the cultural rights of every human being, Article 22, and the realization of the part of every human being to obtain an education that respects dignity and independence, and that is mentioned in Article 26. In the art education is part of an effort to encourage citizens to realize the goal of education to develop the full potential of children, that is in Article 29, as well as a tangible manifestation of the fulfillment of children's participation rights in artistic and cultural life, that is in Article 31. The 1945 Constitution, Article 26C, verse 1, stipulates that in order to improve the quality of life and for the welfare of mankind, everyone has the right to develop themselves through the fulfillment of basic needs, has the right to receive and benefit from education, science, technology, art, and culture. Law number 20 of 2003 concerning the national education system, Article 36, paragraph 1, states that the curriculum is prepared by taking into account various aspects, including the development of science, technology, and the arts. The same law stipulates that arts and culture are the materials that must have a place, especially in the primary and secondary education curricula. The concept of art education in the tradition of Indonesian thought was formulated. In the tradition of Indonesian thought was formulated by Ki Hajar Dewantoro. He said that education is not only sharpening the mind, but also the three Sakti souls, namely mind, emotion, and will. The embodiment of the three is character. Therefore, character education is based on education that not only cultivates the mind, but also feelings and wills. In this context, art plays an important role. Ki Hajar Dewantoro once said that a child's ability to appreciate life and life is related to the child's ability to understand or appreciate aesthetic order and ethical order. The aesthetic order that Ki Hajar meant was beauty, while ethical order is moral maturity, both in attitude and action. For this reason, Ki Hajar emphasized the importance of art education for children. For Ki Hajar, art in education is not only related to the skills of creating and processing taste, but art teaches the balance of reason, taste, and will in acting or creating. Nowadays, there is a tendency for some people to be intolerant towards groups with different cultural backgrounds. They are not uneducated. The problem is not their low creativity or thought, but the lack of sharpening of their taste and intention, so that character does not appear. There, art again plays an important role. Viewed from its relationship with education, art trains us to empathize with others, looking with empathy at the characters in the novel, and then thinking and feeling things from a different point of view from one's own beliefs. For example, by seeing reality from the point of view of various characters in a theater or film. And then taking a stand or sharpening the will into an attitude of life. For example, by drawing conclusions from a play which is then practiced in everyday life. From this, it can be concluded that art plays an important role in cultivating character, as well as reducing intolerant attitudes and strengthening appreciation for cultural diversity. Then art must be integrated into education. How to do so? Art can color education in two approaches. The first one is art as an object of education, namely education that brings students to the inside of the arts. And the second is art as a method of education, namely education delivered through artistic means. Character education should take advantage of both approaches so that character education is not carried out only by increasing the content of art in the curriculum, but also by presenting many learning activities in the frame of artistic activities. Only with art education and art education will we give birth to a young generation who has personality, character, and is able to appreciate the diversity of the nation's culture. That's all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. And let me give the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nuni, for delivering the speech of Director General of Culture, Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology of Republic Indonesia. Respectable ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the end part of the plenary session 1, where we learn how to teach, especially teaching students to design, which means teaching students to develop their creativity, which we can apply to any subject to increase student creativity. The first key to make students to desire and dialogue and attention with the world or around environment to be curious and stay engaged in challenging the context. The second key, the teacher should position themselves in interrupting, suspending, and providing sustenance in developing student creativity. I would like to thank to our prominent speaker, Bapak Alex Rathman, PhD, for your interesting presentation and discussion. Although without a round of applause, we do believe that your talk have made us learn a lot and we give a lot of appreciation in silence. Finally, thank you for all participants for your attention and your patience to join the plenary session to the completion. Have a nice day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The time back to the master of ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Heaps of thanks and appreciation, and also sincere gratitudes from the committee should go to the speakers for today and also to the moderator who has given the best contribution to the success of this plenary session. That is plenary session 1. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are supposed to end at 11:15, but it seems that we have to finish this session much earlier than scheduled. So the next agenda is break, and then the next plenary session will be conducted at 12:30. So it seems that we have much longer break time, and hopefully all of you can join plenary session 2, in which we are going to have the session from the epionemy, and we are going to listen to Professor Miao Wu, PhD, Yan Huo, PhD, and Professor Ji Yong Choi, PhD, and chaired by Christopher Drake, MA, from the Asia Pacific Network for Moral Education. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is the end of plenary session 1. You may stay in the Zoom, but we will start again at 12:30 with the second plenary session. Thank you very much. Please be well informed that suppose you are going to leave the Zoom for a quite few while, you may join the Zoom from the same link that we have shared before. Thank you very much.
Pada